is Ashmita, and I have my partner Shubhendu here with me. This episode is about kitties and the poet and critic T.S. Eliot, and we are going to London in the 1900s. Welcome back to our podcast, The Anti-Library Project. In case it isn't obvious, we are not against the library. We both love reading, buying, and cozying up next to a bookshelf, just like you do. Together, we are committed to connecting books in unlikely ways, drawing them out of their lonely shelves and making reading adventurous again.
Today we'll be talking about how cats might be the key to understanding T.S. Eliot's poetry. Ashmita, when did you first read T.S. Eliot? Was it in any way related to cats?
The first Eliot poem that I read was, of course, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Let us go then you and I when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon the table. In my undergrad days, I literally used to walk through a hospital when returning home. There might have been a morgue nearby too. So, the image stuck to me for real. This was way before I met you, Shubhendu.
I think the first Eliot poem I read was Preludes. Remember? The burnt out ends of smoky days? Burnout was not a term yet. I had a rather dozy undergrad life. But the Eliot poem that really got me was The Wasteland. Not just because April used to be the cruelest month because of exams, but I got quite obsessed with Eliot's dense, elusive style.
That sounds just like you.
I mean, a lot of his lines were so memorable. You know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats in the wasteland. Or this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper in the Hollow Men. As much as all of that was grim, reflective of the devastations in Europe after the First World War, there was something undeniably smart about his poetic technique. All of that somehow matched with his looks. Always in a three-piece suit, nice glasses, sometimes a cigarette hanging on his lips.
He definitely had an intelligent face, but a lot of his contemporary thought that he looked too serious, even austere. Dorothea Richards described him as, I quote, very gaunt and grim, as if he had burnt himself out. And Virginia Woolf, who became a close friend, described his hazel eyes alive in a pale, sculptured, even heavy face. In any case, Eliot's poetry took an even more solemn turn after his conversion to Anglicanism. But who would have thought that this period also marked the beginning of his cat project?
Eliot was always a cat person. He could have been a cat influencer of today. He had cats with names such as Petty Paws and George Puss Dragon. In a letter dated 4th November 1934, addressed to Polly Tandy, the wife of his friend Geoffrey Tandy, he seems to start classifying cats. And I quote, so far in my experience, there are chiefly four kinds of cats. The old Gumby cat, the practical cat, the porpentine cat, and the big Bravo cat. I suspect that yours is a Bravo cat by the look of things. Unquote. He would take those classifications more seriously in old Possum's book of Practical Cats, with its elaborate classification of feline psychology and sociology, with cats like Growl Tiger, a Bravo cat, Macavity, the criminal mastermind, and old Deuteronomy, the wise cat. But who is the possum in this collection?
It is Eliot himself, of course. He signs his letters to Polly Tandy and his daughter Alison as Old Possum, Tom Possum, and Lavender Possum. Possum was the popular nickname Eliot had among his friends, although the most charming letter addressing him as Possum comes from his one time mentor Ezra Pound, where Pound is addressing him as Reverend Possum. The dialect that Pound is using in the letter is drawn from the language the American folklorist Joel Chandler Harris uses to describe the so called Deep South Black dialect, which is quite problematic but not surprising given that it is Ezra Pound. Possum is a rather peace loving character in Chandler's stories. Even as Eliot became a British subject, his American identity stayed on with his moniker Possum, a quintessentially American animal. Although the initial title that Eliot had for the volume is Eliot's Book of Pollicle Dogs and Jellicle Cats as recited to him by the man in white spats. Initially, he himself was the man in white spats. In the published volume, the upper-class club-hopping chonker kitty Bustopher Jones of St. James Street wore white spats. In some ways, Eliot identified himself with a cat as well.
Actually, in the writing stage of the Practical Cats, several of Eliot's friends were cast as dog and cat characters. We find that he addresses Polly Tandy as Pollicle, the main puppy character. Her daughter, Alison Tandy, draws the sketches of two of the cats, Mango Jelly and Rumpelteazer, in her letter to Eliot. Look at this letter, so adorable. There are also letters between Eliot and his godson, Tom Faber, where he introduces his own cat, Jellilorum, as a lily cat. He even illustrates the various country pursuits of the practical cats, assisting their humans in fishing, golfing, etc. In the spring 1936 catalogue, Faber and Faber announced Mr. Eliot's book of Pollicle dogs and Jellicle cats. It would take over 3 years for the book to materialize, with the pulp poems discarded in favor of a volume exclusively dedicated to cats.
I heard Eliot had serious confidence issues and was also a master procrastinator. Is that true?
Yup, in a letter to Geoffrey Faber, he says, and I quote, I am more and more doubtful of my ability to write a successful book of this kind, and I had rather find out early that I can't do it than waste a lot of time for nothing. Unquote. In another letter to F.E. McNeill, he whines, and I quote, at the moment, the Pollicle dogs have been suppressed and the Jellicle cats are in the melting pot. And until they have assumed their final shape after this ordeal, I fear that they must remain in seclusion. Unquote. But how serious was he about the cat poems? Did he consider them serious literary works in comparison to the poetry or essays he was writing in the same period?
Oh, he was quite serious. He wanted the cat poems to be a success on their own and wrote to Geoffrey Faber in July 1939, and I quote, I was so anxious that the cats should flourish, if at all, on their own merits and not as a T.S. Eliot curio, that I would have asked that it be published anonymously had I thought that fair to the publishers. A month before the publication of The Practical Cats, he confided to his friend, the critic, John Hayward, and I quote, my financial future seems to depend on cats.
And that became true.
Old Possum became a huge success on BBC Radio in the Christmas of 1937, and after its publication, it was selling more than 200 copies a week. Eliot was getting fan letters with pictures of kitties named after the cat characters he created. In contrast, his contemporary publication, The Idea of a Christian Society, wasn't selling much. Today, many people, especially in the US, know Eliot's Practical Cats through the immense popularity of the musical Cats by Andrew Lloyd Webber. But he was not the first composer to consider setting the Cats poem to music. The first one was Colin Taylor, who in 1945 sought permission to set Macavity the Mystery Cat to music. And in 1954, 6 pieces from Practical Cats were performed at the Edinburgh Festival.
The British Council asked Eliot in 1957 if he would record his Practical Cats with them. He recorded the 4 quartets with them 10 years before. But when they asked and suggested that cats might be easier to read than quartets, Eliot disagreed, replying, and I quote, I'm not so sure about that. No, you have got to take those cats a lot more seriously. You have got to put a lot of energy into some of those cats. Unquote. Evidently, he took the cat business seriously. In fact, he was much more seriously invested in human-animal relations, especially in cats, than we would think. He totally understands that it's the cats who adopt us, rather than the other way around. In a letter to Polly Tandy, he says, and I quote, when a cat adopts you, and I'm not superstitious at all, I don't mean only black cats. There is nothing to be done about it, except to put up with it and wait until the wind changes. Unquote.
You're right. Did you notice? The yellow fog in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock seems like a cat. It is obviously a cat that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains. let fall upon its back the soot that falls from the chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. Eliot's cat poems brings such an important and a really cool dimension to his poetry. But are these poems equally significant in his oeuvre?
It is the poet and critic Elizabeth Sewell who claims that, and I quote, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, Mr. Eliot's overt nonsense work, is not a chance production, the master in a lighter mood. It is integral to the whole body of his work and a key to his poetry, unquote. And she identifies Lewis Carroll as, I quote, the best interpreter for Mr. Eliot, unquote. Eliot has such brilliant telltale names for cats that makes this connection obvious. Macavity, the mystery cat, Mr. Mistopheles, the young tuxedo with magical abilities, Gus, the theatre cat, etc. All of which definitely remind me of Lewis Carroll and also of Edward Lear. There's more. In the poem, The Naming of Cats in Practical Cats, Eliot devises a tripartite structure of naming cats: the familial, the particular, and the secretive. The familial names are names that the family use daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonso, or James, such as Victor or Jonathan, George or Bill Bailey. All of them sensible, everyday names. He even considers names like Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter as sensible everyday names, which is not surprising for Eliot, the classicist. Eliot thinks the cat needs some names more dignified, worthy of the cat's perpendicular tails or whiskers. Names like Moncastrap, Quaxo, or Coricopat, such as Bombalurina or else Gellilorum. Caricopat is a calico cat that loves petting, and Bombalurina seems quite high maintenance. But humans can never know the true mysteries of the cat, as old Possum notes. But above and beyond, there's still one name left over, and that is the name that you will never guess. The name that no human research can discover, but the cat himself knows and will never confess. And the cat seems to be quite absorbed in their Platonic essence. His mind is engaged in a rapt contemplation of the thought of the thought of the thought of his name, his ineffable, effable, ineffable, deep and inscrutable singular name. For some reason, it does remind me of his Hollow Man. Between the emotion and the response falls the shadow. That's exactly how the human-cat relation functions.
The humans are not always that doomed. In fact, Eliot had some guidance for us Pussians in the last poem of the volume called The Addressing of Cats. If the humans follow appropriate protocol and make some favored offerings, the cats might reveal their names. Offerings include some suitable bites, such as a dish of cream, or quintessential British fares, such as Strasbourg pie, potted cruise, and salmon paste. The final revelation of the cat's name can be achieved, and I quote, and so in time you reach your aim and finally call him by his name, unquote. All of his courtship is designed to make us realize, I quote, that cats are much like you and me and other people whom we find possessed of various types of mind, unquote.
Good old Possum is also insistent on the distinction between the dog and the cat. And he says, and I quote, dog is on the whole what you would call a simple soul, unquote. But with cats, the rule often is, quote, don't speak till you were spoken to, unquote. There is one prominent pup poem in the volume titled Of the Awful Battle of the Peaks and Pollicles, who are implacable, passionate foes and bark against each other, in which the pugs and poms also participate from their balconies. The peace ultimately is ensured by the great rumpus cat, with the glare of his eyes and his yawning. We do see a bit of racial tension here. The Pollicle, a Yorkshire Terrier in cahoots with some of his Scottish cousins, do not like the immigrant Pekingese, within quotes heathen Chinese breed, much. The Scottish Terriers literally bark to the tune of When the Blue Bonnets Come Over the Border. the famous Scottish ballad attributed to Sir Walter Scott, also associated with the Jacobite cause. I'm even more curious about the social stratifications of the cat world though. Ashmita, who is your favorite cat character in Old Possums?
It is hard to choose between cats, but I love Macavity. He's a ginger cat, very tall and thin, with sunken eyes and deeply lined brows. He is a criminal mastermind. His coat is dusty and whiskers uncombed, and yet he's supple and graceful. I quote, Macavity's a mystery cat. He's called the hidden paw, for he's the master criminal who can defy the law. He's the bafflement of Scotland Yard, the flying squad's despair, for when they reach the scene of crime, Macavity's not there. His name is an allusion to, wait for it, Professor Moriarty, the archenemy of Sherlock Holmes. Eliot was a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, and the description of Macavity as a tall, thin, sunken eyed, and dome headed cat who, I quote, sways his head from side to side with movements like a snake, unquote, matches the description of Professor Moriarty in Conan Doyle's The Final Problem, where the professor is introduced. I quote, he is extremely tall and thin, his forehead domes out in a white curve, and his two eyes are deeply sunken in his head. His face protrudes forward and is forever oscillating from side to side in a curiously reptilian fashion. Unquote. Sherlock fans were making these interlinks between Moriarty and Macavity as far back as in 1954 with an article in the Baker Street Journal. In a letter to the physicist Frank Morley, Eliot himself wrote, I quote, I have done a new cat modeled on the late Professor Moriarty, but he doesn't seem very popular. Too sophisticated, perhaps. Unquote. Macavity is also marked by some kind of a mystical contemplativeness. When you think he's fast asleep, he's always wide awake, coupled with a scientific precision in his craft, same as Moriarty. And I quote, and they say that all the cats whose wicked deeds are widely known, I might mention Mungo Jerry, I might mention Griddlebone, are nothing more than agents for that cat who all the time just controls their operations, the Napoleon of crime. Now, this Napoleon of crime is also an evident allusion to Moriarty, whom Sherlock Holmes describes as the Napoleon of crime in The Final Problem, and again as Napoleon gone wrong in The Valley of Fear. The cavity in Macavity is also an allusion to cavity or void, and the cat is a mathematical genius capable of doing long division sums, same as Moriarty. Macavity defies the laws of gravity, and he can levitate with such ease that it would make a fakir stare. The whole poem is loaded with references to more Sherlock Holmes texts, like The Adventure of the Naval Treaty, as Macavity remains embroiled in international crimes, endangering naval treaties and bothering the Foreign Office. No wonder one of the most prestigious awards in mystery writing today is called the Macavity Awards. So, what are so many illusions doing in a volume largely understood to be a children's book and a fringe work of a major modernist poet and critic?
Well, I frankly think Old Possums has all the claims to be regarded as a major work of Eliot. Perhaps we have taken his image of being this epitome of post-war grimness and austerity too seriously. The volume also underlines the constant intertextual links between modernism and Victorian literature, and even 18th century literature, which many modernists I know would perhaps passionately disavow. I will give two examples. The cat Growl Tiger, who is a major agent of Macavity, is called the Terror of the Thames, which is a rather obscure allusion to the June 1886 edition of the comic journal Fun, which was a rival of The Punch, which called the newly launched launcher the Terror of the Thames. But it makes perfect sense, because despite his rugged looks, marked with many a battle, Growl Tiger can outrun most of the felines. The other instance is of Gus, the theatre cat. His full name is Asparagus. This cat is a veteran actor and played all kinds of roles. He has been the understudy of the medieval merchant Dick Whittington's legendary cat who stopped the plague in the Moorish lands. He has raised Hamlet's ghost. He has sat next to Little Nell in the stage adaptation of Dickens's Old Curiosity Shop, and so on. But unfortunately, he, at ripe old age, got chased out of the stage by an Anglo-Indian official for flaying an Indian tiger, which is a key symbol of British imperial propaganda, as tiger was often associated with the so-called violence of Indian landscapes and the predatory nature of colonized men. And I quote, "He once played a tiger, could do it again, which an Indian colonel pursued down a drain." Unquote.
I agree that the feline spaces conjured by old possums is a temporally layered site where bits and pieces of different moments of history are present simultaneously rather than sequentially, which is true of his very best works. Eliot takes the idea of cats having 99 lives and makes it a very potent literary device. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. Please like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Spotify, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for updates on future events.